Hi, I'm Odalyn. I watched my 5-year-old daughter flinch, clutching tiny hands over fresh bruises, whispering, "Mommy, it hurts to sit." When I tried to call for help, my own mother yanked the phone away and laughed. "It's just discipline." They told me I was raising a liar, while they broke every piece of her trust on that cold kitchen floor. They thought I'd stay silent, but they didn't know what I was about to do. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening and where are you? Drop a comment below, because you need to hear what happened when I finally stood up for my daughter. I was folding the last of Mavis's tiny shirts when the morning sun cut through the blinds, hitting the old linoleum and throwing light across the kitchen floor. I heard the fridge open, the quiet clink of the orange juice bottle against the counter. I didn't say anything, just kept folding, pretending I wasn't worried about Colton waking up in the back room, pretending I didn't see how Mavis's hands trembled when she tried to pour her own glass. "Mommy, look," she whispered, holding up the cup, proud of herself. She was 5, small for her age, hair sticking to her forehead as she tried so hard to do it right. I forced a smile, nodding, feeling that twist in my chest I always felt in this house, like the air was too thick to breathe in. "Good job, baby," I said, too softly, like if I spoke louder the walls would hear. I was thinking about the job applications I had lined up that afternoon, how I'd need to borrow Mom's old car again, how she'd remind me it wasn't gas money that grew on trees, how Colton would grunt and look at me like I was the extra mouth ruining everything. That was when I heard the glass hit the floor. It wasn't even a loud sound, just a soft pop and the splash of orange juice spreading across the tile, creeping under the cabinets. Mavis's eyes went wide, the glass rolling away from her little feet. She looked at me like I held the whole world in my hands, and it was about to shatter. "I'm sorry, Mommy," she whispered, voice so small it barely touched the air. "It's okay," I said quickly, dropping the clothes on the couch and grabbing a towel from the counter. My hands moved fast, mopping up the spill, glancing back toward the hallway every few seconds, praying he didn't hear, praying the juice didn't soak into the grout. But the floorboards creaked. Colton's heavy boots thumped closer, and Mavis flinched, pressing herself against the fridge like she could disappear if she held still enough. I turned to see him standing there, hair wild, belt already unbuckled like he was ready to make a point before he even knew what happened. "What the hell is this?" His voice was sharp, slicing the room in half. "It was an accident," I said, trying to keep my voice even, not begging, just explaining, like maybe he'd listen today. He looked at the juice on the floor, at the towel in my hands, at Mavis trying to hide behind my leg. "You can't even keep your brat from making a mess for 5 damn minutes." "She's 5, Colton," I said, almost under my breath, but it was too late. His eyes snapped to Mavis, and before I could step in front of her, he grabbed her arm, pulling her out from behind me. She whimpered, tiny hands trying to hold onto my jeans, but he yanked her free. I dropped the towel, reaching out, but he was faster, stronger. "Colton, don't—" The belt cracked through the air before I could finish, a sharp, sickening sound that made me freeze. It landed across her back, once, twice, 3 times, leaving angry red stripes on her pale skin. Mavis's scream wasn't loud, it was thin and breaking, the sound of a child trying not to cry too hard because she thought it would be worse if she did. I stood there, hands in the air like I was stuck between stopping him and holding myself together. The towel lay in a heap by my foot, soaking up the last of the juice, as if the floor had decided to drink it instead of us. When he finally let her go, she dropped to the floor, curling into herself, small and shaking. Her knees pulled to her chest, face buried in her arms, sobs tearing out of her in gasps. "It'll hurt down there if I sit," she whimpered, rocking herself, trying to disappear. I fell to my knees beside her, pulling her into my arms, pressing her head to my chest, trying to shield her from the world, from him, from everything. My hands shook as I smoothed her hair back, kissing the top of her head, telling her she was okay even though nothing was okay. Vera came in then, holding a coffee mug, watching like we were an inconvenience. "Oh, stop babying her, Odalyn, she's fine. Kids need to learn." "She's 5, Mom," I said, voice trembling. 5 and already turning into a drama queen, Vera shot back, sipping her coffee like the world wasn't burning around us. I looked down at Mavis, her small hands gripping my shirt, her body shaking against me. I couldn't stand it anymore, the smell of coffee, the sound of the clock ticking, the way Vera looked at us like we were weak. I reached for the phone on the counter, hands trembling so badly I almost dropped it. My thumb hovered over the numbers as Mavis's tear-filled eyes looked up at me, silent, begging me to do something. "You're not calling the police," Vera said, her voice calm, deadly. She stepped forward, grabbed the phone from my hand, and ended the call before it could even ring. "It's just discipline," she said, her eyes meeting mine, cold and sharp, daring me to say otherwise. I didn't say a word when Vera's hand crushed the phone in mine, cutting off the call before it could even ring through. She set it down with a click that felt louder than anything else in the room. I looked into her eyes and saw it plain. She would always choose him over us, no matter what he did or who he hurt. For a moment, we stood there in the kitchen, the air thick with the smell of coffee gone cold and something burnt from breakfast. I could hear Mavis in the living room, her quiet sniffles, the soft rustle of the old blanket she clung to on the couch. Vera's eyes flicked toward the sound, then back at me. "You want him in jail for teaching her respect?" she said, her voice calm like she was explaining the weather. Not the welts on my child's back. My heart thudded in my chest, loud enough I thought she could hear it. My hands were still trembling and I shoved them into my pockets so she wouldn't see. I wanted to scream, to grab that phone and call for help, but I could see it already. Vera telling me I was ungrateful, telling me I could pack my things, telling me I could figure it out on the street if I thought I knew better. I had nowhere else to go, and she knew it. I spent the rest of the morning moving around the house like a shadow, checking on Mavis, folding towels, pretending to clean what didn't need cleaning just to stay out of Colton's line of sight. He didn't speak to me, didn't look at me, but the way he slammed the fridge door and let his boots stomp against the floors said more than words ever could. When the sun started dipping, turning the tiny kitchen gold, Vera called us to the table for dinner like nothing had happened. I helped Mavis into her chair, her small body stiff, her eyes darting every time Colton cleared his throat. She pressed her hands into her lap, trying not to cry out when she shifted, trying to be brave. Vera talked about church that morning, about how Pastor Jim said we needed more volunteers for the summer fair. She passed the mashed potatoes to Colton, ignoring how Mavis flinched when his hand brushed the table too hard. The fork in my hand felt heavy, like it would drop if I didn't focus on holding it. "I'm not hungry," Mavis whispered, looking down at her plate, untouched. "You'll eat," Vera said sharply, her eyes narrowing. "It hurts to sit," Mavis whispered, so softly I almost missed it. Colton's eyes snapped to her, cold and mean, and he leaned back in his chair with that crooked smirk he wore when he wanted to make you feel small. "You're raising a little liar, Adeline." My name on his tongue felt like dirt being thrown on a grave. I opened my mouth, then closed it again, swallowing the words that burned in my throat. I saw Vera nod, picking up her coffee cup. "Kids these days are too soft," she said, not even looking at Mavis. Mavis's lip quivered, and she dropped her eyes to her plate again, a tear slipping down her cheek. I wanted to stand up, to pull her into my arms, to tell them both to shut up, to scream that this was wrong. But I didn't. I stayed sitting, the fork in my hand stabbing into the potatoes, the smell of gravy turning my stomach. After dinner, I washed the dishes while the kitchen light buzzed overhead, casting everything in a dull yellow glow. Vera watched her shows in the living room, Colton's snores already rattling the walls. Mavis lay curled on the couch, finally drifting off with her thumb tucked under her chin, the blanket pulled up to her chin like a shield. I dried my hands and saw the belt on the counter, left there like a warning. My fingers hovered over it, remembering the sound it made, the way Mavis's scream echoed in the kitchen. My hands shook, but I grabbed it anyway, rolling it up tightly, shoving it in the drawer beneath the towels. I turned to look at Mavis's small shoes by the door, the ones with the rainbow laces she picked out herself at the thrift store. They looked too small, too fragile, like they could break if someone stepped on them. I stood there for a long moment, the house quiet except for the hum of the old fridge, and I realized I couldn't stay silent much longer. "They will not break her like they broke me," I whispered to the empty kitchen, the words heavy but true in my mouth. The next morning came with gray light slipping through the thin curtain, brushing across the mattress where Mavis and I had finally fallen asleep, fully clothed. I barely had a moment to open my eyes before I felt her tiny hand on my shoulder, her voice so small it almost broke in the air. "Mommy, I tried to be good." Her cheeks were wet, the tears cutting clear lines through the faint smudges of sleep. I pushed myself up, ignoring the stiffness in my neck from sleeping on the edge, and pulled her close, letting her hair tickle my chin as I breathed in her scent of soap and the faint lingering fear that clung to her. "You are good, baby," I whispered, rocking her slightly, trying to keep my voice calm even as I felt the heat behind my own eyes. "You're always good." She flinched when she shifted, her body stiffening as she tried to sit upright. And that's when I saw them, the dark bruises across her thighs, fading into yellow around the edges, but still angry and raw near the center. I bit down on the inside of my cheek to keep the gasp from escaping, my fingers brushing lightly against the marks as I helped her adjust. "I didn't want to spill," she said, voice breaking again. I tried to be careful. I held her tighter, pressing my lips to the top of her head, letting her know without words that none of this was her fault, that she didn't deserve any of it. She rested her cheek against my chest, and I let my eyes close for a moment, fighting the wave of grief that threatened to drown me before the day had even started. It was when I heard footsteps in the hallway that I felt it, the tightness in her back, the way her breath caught, and she pulled closer to me, her small body freezing as Vera's slippers shuffled past the door. That fear, that instant panic, was too familiar. In that moment I was 10 again, crouched at the top of the stairs while Vera's hand wrapped around my hair, yanking me down each step while her voice hissed, "You made me do this." I remembered the smell of the old carpet, the roughness against my skin, the way I tried to apologize, thinking it would stop her, thinking if I said sorry enough, it would matter. Standing there in that small room, with the paint peeling near the window and the single mattress on the floor, I realized I was watching the same story repeat itself in Mavis's flinch, her silence, her desperate need to please. And I couldn't pretend anymore that I didn't see it happening. Later that morning, while Vera made coffee in the kitchen, Mavis sat beside me on the floor with a small coloring book, her crayon dragging lightly over the page as she tried to avoid sitting fully on the bruises. She paused, looking up at me with wide eyes, her voice barely above a breath. "Mommy, will I get in trouble at school if I tell my teacher I'm scared to come home?" My heart stopped. For a moment the world went quiet, the only sound the drip of coffee into the pot, the hum of the fridge, the tick of the old clock on the wall. I opened my mouth, searching for the right words, but before I could speak, Vera's voice cut through the silence from the doorway. "You better not let her ruin us." She said it so plainly, like she was talking about the weather, her eyes hard and unblinking as they met mine. For a moment, it felt like I was that little girl again, the one who didn't dare speak back, who nodded and obeyed because it was safer. But Mavis was looking at me, waiting, needing me to say something different. "Sweetheart, you can tell your teacher if you're scared," I said, my voice shaking but steady enough. "You're not in trouble." Vera's mouth tightened, her hand gripping the coffee cup so hard her knuckles turned white, but she didn't say another word. She turned and walked back into the kitchen, leaving behind the sharp scent of coffee and the cold weight of her warning. That night, after Vera had gone to bed and Colton's snores filled the house like the rumble of a distant storm, I watched Mavis sleep, her small hands curled into fists near her face, her breathing slow and even. I traced the line of the bruise on her arm with my eyes, letting the quiet of the room settle around us. I whispered to the dark, to the ceiling, to the part of me that had been quiet for too long, "You will not carry this fear. Not like I did." I picked up my phone, the screen lighting up the room in a soft glow, and opened a new note. My fingers hovered for a moment before I started typing, the words feeling heavy but true with each letter that appeared. I will get us out. No matter what. Vera handed me that church flyer like it was nothing more than a neighborly favor, her lips stretched in that tight smile she wore when she was trying to look holy. "Family looks good in the pews, you know," she said, her voice syrupy enough to make my stomach turn. I took the flyer, staring at the glossy picture of a happy family sitting under a stained glass window, the father's hand on the mother's shoulder, the children smiling politely. Vera's eyes flickered as she watched me, looking for something, waiting to see if I would slip, if I would let her know that her threats were working. I folded the flyer in half, then in half again, pressing the edges with my thumb until they were sharp enough to leave a crease against my skin. The kitchen smelled of burnt coffee, the pot long overdue for a cleaning, but Vera liked to leave it that way, claiming the bitterness made it stronger. She moved past me, the small sway of her shoulders brushing mine as she went to the sink, rinsing out a cup as if the conversation hadn't just happened. "Church helps keep families together," she called over her shoulder, her voice light. But the edge was there, hidden beneath the Sunday softness. Later, as I wiped down the counter, Mavis shuffled in, her small feet making soft sounds against the linoleum. She avoided looking at Vera, instead coming to stand by me, pressing her side against my leg. I reached down, brushing a hand over her hair, and she leaned in, letting out a breath she'd been holding. Vera's eyes met mine across the kitchen, and there was a flicker, something dark that passed across her face before she turned away, drying her hands with a towel, folding it slow, methodical. "You know, if you start running your mouth to people who don't belong in this family, you're going to find yourself out on the street," she said, her voice calm, but each word fell like a stone. She stepped closer, the towel now twisted between her hands, and she reached out, gripping my wrist hard enough to make me wince. Her nails dug into my skin, leaving behind small crescents that would turn red, then purple. I didn't pull away. I let her see the way my eyes hardened, the way my jaw tightened, the way I wasn't going to crumble just because she wanted me to. She let go, dropping the towel onto the counter before walking away, humming a hymn under her breath as she disappeared down the hallway. The day dragged, slow, like the thick heat that settled into the house when the sun hit the windows just right. Mavis tried to play with her dolls, but she kept glancing at the door, flinching when footsteps passed, her hands twisting in the fabric of her dress. That afternoon I stood outside the small building that housed Mavis's classroom, the air thick with the scent of grass and the faint exhaust from the nearby road. Parents shuffled past me, calling out to their children, waving goodbye to the teachers who smiled politely, their voices soft and bright. Mavis came out, clutching her backpack, her eyes searching for me, relief flooding her face when she saw I was there. She walked quickly, her small shoes scuffing the pavement, and I bent down to take her hand, brushing a kiss over her hair. One of the teachers, a woman with kind eyes and a clipboard pressed to her chest, stepped closer, her voice low as she handed me a small slip of paper. "Mavis has been telling us she's afraid to go home," she whispered, her eyes flicking toward Mavis, then back to me. My stomach twisted, the world tilting for a moment as I took the note, folding it into my palm. I forced a smile, nodding, my heart pounding in my chest as I thanked her, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. On the walk back to the car, Mavis's voice came, soft and uncertain. "Am I in trouble for telling Mommy?" I stopped, crouching down so we were eye to eye, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "No, baby. You're never in trouble for telling the truth." She nodded, but her eyes were wide, her hand clutching mine tighter as we walked the rest of the way in silence. That evening, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind that makes your skin itch. I folded Mavis's yellow dress, the one with the faded orange stain from the juice she spilled, holding it for a moment before placing it on the small pile of her clothes. Standing there, I realized something inside me was shifting. Vera's threats, the fear she tried to plant in me, were losing their grip. Every bruise I saw on Mavis, every flinch, every tear, it was burning away the fear, leaving behind something else, resolve. Later, when the house had settled into the soft noises of sleep, I lay on the mattress beside Mavis, her small breaths steady as she slept. I kept my eyes open, staring into the darkness, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me, but I wasn't going to break. "It ends with me," I whispered, the words steady, quiet, but strong enough that I knew they were true. The following morning, the screen of my phone glowed in the gray light that slipped through the blinds, and there it was, a message from Vera. "Remember whose roof you're under. Don't ruin what's left." Beneath the words was a photo, grainy but clear enough to see the folded laundry basket sitting in the hallway, the one I had placed outside our room after Mavis fell asleep. My breath caught. She had taken it while I was in the bathroom, whispering to myself in the mirror that we were going to get out. My thumb hovered over the delete button, but I let the message stay, a quiet reminder of the lines she was willing to cross. I locked the door to the room, pressing my forehead against the wood for a moment before pulling in a deep breath. "She's not going to control me forever," I whispered, the words fragile but real. By mid-morning, I was at the store, stocking the bottom shelf with cans, each metallic thud a small comfort in its predictability. The smell of the cleaning products and the buzz of the fluorescent lights reminded me of every shift I had worked since taking this job, hoping it would be the stepping stone to something better. A mother passed by, her hand gently holding her little boy's, the child looking up with a tired grin as she squeezed his fingers. It caught me off guard, the way that simple touch could look so safe. It made me think of Mavis, the way she had flinched when Colton's boots hit the floor too hard, the way her eyes would dart to me, searching for a sign that it was okay to breathe. "Rough night?" my manager asked, his voice low as he passed behind me, eyeing the dark circles under my eyes reflected in the freezer doors. I forced a smile, one I had practiced too many times, shrugging lightly as I stacked another can. "Just life," I said. "Yeah," he replied, already walking away, leaving me in the aisle with the hum of the coolers and the echo of my own thoughts. When my shift ended, I stayed in the break room for a few extra minutes, letting my hands rest on the table as I tried to gather the strength to walk back into that house. I touched the corner of the note the teacher had given me, folded neatly in my pocket, a reminder that someone else had seen us. Evening fell with the heavy scent of fried oil hanging in the kitchen as I returned home. I set down my bag and found Colton leaning against the counter, the overhead light highlighting the lines in his face. His eyes were already glazed, the smell of stale whiskey rolling off him as he watched me. "Don't think you're better than us just because you've got a job now," he said, his voice slurred, but the edge of his words cut deep. I didn't respond, moving toward the sink to rinse my hands, keeping my back to him. "If those people come around asking questions," he continued, pushing off the counter, "I'll tell them you're unfit, letting that kid lie, letting her ruin this family." The words slammed into me, and for a moment, I felt the air disappear from the room. My hand gripped the edge of the sink, knuckles whitening as I stared down at the water swirling in the drain. I turned slowly, meeting his gaze, noticing the way he swayed, how his grip on the counter tightened to steady himself. It struck me then. He was weaker than the fear he created. "I'm not afraid of you," I said, my voice quiet, steady. He sneered, turning away, mumbling under his breath as he walked down the hall. That night, after the lights were off and the only sounds were the creaks of the old house settling, I sat on the bathroom floor, back pressed against the tub, the cold tile grounding me as I let silent tears slip down my cheeks. "I can't do this anymore," I whispered to the cracked mirror, my reflection looking back at me with eyes that were tired but not empty. There was a knock, soft, hesitant, and then Mavis's small voice came through the door. "Mommy, it's okay to leave." I pressed a hand over my mouth, biting back the sob that rose in my throat, letting her words sink into the parts of me that had started to believe we were trapped. I opened the door, pulling her into my arms, feeling her small hands clutch at my shirt. "You're so brave, baby," I whispered into her hair, breathing her in as I let her strength steady me. When she fell back asleep, curled against me on the thin mattress, I sat up, wiping the last of the tears from my face. I reached under the bed, pulling out the small box where I kept our papers, IDs, a copy of Mavis's birth certificate, a small stack of cash I had managed to save, dollar by dollar from every grocery shift. "It's time," I whispered into the darkness, letting the weight of the decision settle into me, solid and unshakable. I slipped the folded yellow dress into the bottom of the bag, tucking it beneath the small stack of bills and our IDs, as dawn barely cracked across the thin curtains. Mavis stirred, rubbing her eyes, the stuffed fox pressed tight to her chest as she blinked at me in the blue morning light. "Mommy, are we going somewhere?" Her voice was hushed, cautious, but I saw the small glint of hope flicker in her eyes. "We're going on a little adventure, baby," I said, managing a small smile as I zipped the bag, swallowing the tremor in my throat. We moved quietly, careful not to let the old floorboards creak. I helped her into her faded sneakers, the ones with the laces that never stayed tied, and she held onto my hand with a grip that told me she understood, even if she didn't have the words yet. She looked down at the bag, then back at me, and whispered, "Will we be safe, Mommy?" I knelt in front of her, brushing the hair from her forehead, pressing a kiss there before I answered, "Yes, safer than we've been." The house smelled of burnt coffee and stale anger when Vera's knock came at the door. "Odalyn, come help with breakfast." "Mavis isn't feeling well," I called back, keeping my voice even. "I'm going to let her rest." There was silence on the other side of the door, a thick moment where I knew she was listening, weighing whether to press further. Then her footsteps moved away, and I exhaled, reaching for my phone with shaking fingers. I texted Indira, "Need that ride, now." She didn't ask questions, just replied, "5 minutes." I peeked out the window, watching as Vera's silhouette moved past the kitchen window, humming an off-key hymn as she fussed with the dishes. I took Mavis's hand, our bag on my shoulder, and we slipped out the back door, the screen creaking quietly before it clicked shut behind us. We walked quickly down the street, the early morning air biting at our skin, the bag thumping against my hip with each step. My eyes stayed on the road ahead, scanning for Indira's old sedan as Mavis's small steps hurried to keep up. When the car pulled up, Indira leaned across the seat, unlocking the door. Her eyes met mine, no words needed as she looked at Mavis and then back at me. We got in, and as we pulled away from the curb, I didn't dare look back at the house. Indira dropped us at a motel on the edge of town, the kind of place with buzzing neon signs that blinked too slowly, leaving a glow on the cracked sidewalk. She handed me a folded 20, her hand squeezing mine. "Call me if you need anything," she said before driving off. Inside the small room, the air was thick with the scent of bleach and something older, something tired. Mavis looked around, her stuffed fox clutched tight, and whispered, "Is it safe here, Mommy?" I sat down on the edge of the bed, pulling her into my lap. "It's safer than anywhere else right now," I said, letting her head rest on my shoulder as she closed her eyes. Later, with the door locked and the shades drawn, I pulled out my phone and dialed the number I had saved for days. My voice shook as I spoke, but I didn't let it stop me. "I need to report child abuse," I said. I told them everything. About Colton, about Vera, about the bruises on Mavis's legs, the threats, the fear that lived in every corner of that house. I sent them photos of Mavis's bruises and the messages Vera had sent me, my fingers trembling as I pressed send. The agent on the other end of the line listened, then said softly, "You're doing the right thing, Odalyn. We'll open an investigation immediately." I hung up, staring at the screen until it went dark, my reflection staring back at me, eyes tired but alive. That night, I lay on the stiff motel bed beside Mavis, the mattress squeaking every time she shifted, headlights sweeping across the thin curtains from the road outside. I could hear the distant hum of traffic, the occasional bark of a stray dog, but inside that small room, there was a quiet I hadn't felt in a long time. I brushed the hair back from Mavis's forehead as she slept, leaning down to kiss her temple. "We're free now," I whispered, even though I knew freedom had a price, and ours might still come due. "But freedom," I learned, doesn't come without a fight, and they weren't done with us yet. The morning air in the motel was cool, the window cracked just enough to let in a breeze that smelled like concrete and early dawn. I sat on the edge of the bed, my phone in hand, checking for messages while Mavis curled against the thin pillow, her small breath steady. A notification blinked, a text from an unknown number. "Remember whose roof you're under. Don't ruin what's left." Attached was a photo of our folded clothes in the motel room, my shoes lined by the door, Mavis's stuffed fox on the pillow. My stomach clenched. Vera knew where we were, and she was letting me know that she was watching. I locked the door, checked it twice, and whispered to myself, "She won't control me anymore." Later that day, CPS came to the motel. A young caseworker named Erin stood in the doorway, clipboard in hand, eyes soft but focused as she looked at me, then at Mavis, who clung to my leg, hiding half her face behind her stuffed fox. "I'm here to follow up on your report, Ms. Odlin. May we sit?" Her voice was calm, practiced, and for a moment I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, we were being heard. They took photos of Mavis's bruises again, measured the fading marks, noted the colors, the shapes. Each click of the camera felt like a small victory and a fresh wound all at once. Mavis whispered, "I don't want to go back," her eyes pleading. I held her, kissing the top of her head, telling her she wouldn't have to. When Erin left, she said, "We will notify Vera and Colton of the investigation. You've done the right thing." The words should have felt like comfort, but they settled in my chest like a cold stone. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the grimy motel curtains, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. I checked it, and there it was. Vera's voice screaming through a voicemail, "You've destroyed this family. Do you think you're better than us? You'll regret this." Another message followed from Colton. "You don't know who you're messing with." I could hear the venom in his words, the promise of more pain, but I blocked both their numbers, screenshotting everything, saving it for evidence. My hands shook, but I whispered, "Not this time," as I deleted their contacts. The next morning, I called Indira and met her at the diner down the road. She was already there, seated in a corner booth with 2 coffees steaming between us. She looked at me, her eyes filled with worry and anger. "You know Vera's been spreading lies about you at church?" Indira leaned in, lowering her voice. "She's saying you're unstable, that you're coaching Mavis to lie, that you're trying to break up the family for money." I felt the blood drain from my face, anger rising beneath the fear. Vera was flipping the story, twisting it before CPS could act. I closed my eyes, letting the noise of the diner fade for a moment, hearing Mavis's small voice telling me she didn't want to go back, reminding me why I was here. "Let them talk," I said finally, my voice low. "I'm not backing down." After leaving the diner, I walked back to the motel, the cool morning air brushing against my face, clearing my mind. Back in the room, I sat at the small desk, pulling out a notepad and pen, writing down every threat Vera and Colton had made, every bruise I had seen, every time Mavis flinched at the sound of footsteps. I organized the photos, the texts, the voicemails. I knew this would escalate, but I also knew it was the only way to protect Mavis. That afternoon, I filed a request for a restraining order at the courthouse, my hands steady as I signed the papers. As I left, I felt a small weight lift, a sense that for once, I was not just reacting, but fighting back. Back at the motel, Mavis hugged me tightly, her small arms wrapped around my neck. "You're brave, Mommy," she whispered, and I felt tears sting my eyes, but I held them back, kissing her forehead. "That's because of you," I whispered back. That night I checked the locks again, pulling the curtains shut as headlights flashed across them. I turned off the light, sitting on the bed as Mavis fell asleep beside me, her breath soft, her small hand holding on to mine. Then a car pulled up, headlights shining through the thin curtains, stopping. The engine idled, and I heard a voice, familiar and sharp, yelling from outside, "Open this door now!" I stood there for a moment, frozen, then stepped between Mavis and the door, breathing in, ready for whatever came next. My heart was pounding, but I held steady, feet planted on the cheap carpet, as Colton's fists pounded the door again. His voice was rough, spitting words through the crack. "Open up, Odalyn. We're gonna talk about this now." Behind him, I heard Vera's voice, shrill and cracking. "You're poisoning that child's mind, you ungrateful girl." She was always good at twisting blame, making herself the victim even as she stood there, helping him hurt us. Mavis was crouched in the bathroom, clutching her stuffed fox, eyes wide and wet, her small shoulders shaking. I turned just enough to meet her gaze and mouthed, "It's okay." My hand trembled as I dialed 911, pressing the phone to my ear. "They're here," I told the dispatcher, my voice flat, "and they're not leaving." The minutes stretched thin while I waited, Colton pounding, Vera screaming, and me standing there, refusing to move. When the red and blue lights finally bounced off the window, Colton tried to shove the door open, but the deadbolt held. 2 officers pulled him back as he yelled, "You think you're better than us? You think you're gonna win this?" I didn't answer. I only pulled Mavis from the bathroom, holding her close, whispering, "It's going to be okay now." The next morning, we found ourselves at the CPS office, the stale coffee smell mixing with the tension that seemed to stick to the walls. Mavis's hand was warm in mine, her yellow dress tucked under her arm like a safety blanket. We sat there, waiting, the caseworker's heels clicking across the linoleum floor as she called us into a small room with bright lights and a cold table. Vera and Colton arrived with a lawyer, dressed in clothes that were too crisp for the kind of people they really were. Vera's eyes met mine, cold and sharp, her lips twisting into a fake smile before she turned to the lawyer, whispering something I couldn't hear. When we were called into the small courtroom, I took a breath, squeezing Mavis's hand before letting it go as we stepped inside. The judge looked tired, but his eyes were kind, scanning the papers in front of him before looking up at me. I told him everything. I told him about the nights I lay awake, waiting for the sound of Colton's footsteps, the mornings Mavis flinched when someone moved too quickly, the way Vera would grab my wrist so hard it left bruises, telling me it was for my own good. I spoke about the belt, about Mavis crying in the night, about the fear that never left our small lives. Colton's lawyer tried to twist my words, saying I was exaggerating, that Mavis was confused, that I was unstable, and trying to tear the family apart. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, the sting in my eyes, but I kept my voice even as I reached into my bag, pulling out the small recorder Indira had given me. I pressed play, and Vera's voice filled the courtroom, clear and sharp. "A belt is how you teach them to listen," she said on the recording, her words cutting through the silence like a blade. I watched Vera's face go pale, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for a way out, but there was none. The judge looked at her, then at Colton, then back at me. His gavel came down, the sound sharp, final. He granted the restraining order, ordered an investigation into the abuse, and granted me temporary sole custody of Mavis. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt air rush into my lungs without the weight of fear pressing it back out. As we stepped out of the courtroom, Mavis looked up at me, tears shining in her eyes. "We did it, Mommy," she whispered, her voice small but strong. I bent down, kissing her forehead. "Yes, baby, we did." But as we walked down the steps of the courthouse, I felt Vera's eyes on us. She was standing near the door, her arms crossed, her face set in that cold, familiar line. Her lips moved, silent, but I knew the words. "This isn't over." I held Mavis's hand tighter, knowing freedom was never given. It had to be protected. We walked out of that courthouse, the air heavy with the weight of what we'd left behind, and stepped into the uncertain light of our new beginning. 2 months later, the sun slipped through the cracked window of our small apartment, warming the second-hand couch that sagged in the middle. Mavis sat cross-legged at the small kitchen table, her crayons scattered around her as she drew swirls of color that had begun to look like hope. I was washing the last of the dishes, the clink of the plates grounding me in the quiet that now filled our space. I caught myself watching her, the way her small shoulders relaxed, the way her feet swung under the chair without fear of who might walk in the door. It wasn't much, this apartment with its peeling paint and thrifted lamp, but it was ours. It was safe. When I told her it was time to get ready for school, Mavis ran to her drawer and pulled out the yellow dress with the faded orange stain. I paused, remembering the day she wore it before everything changed, before we found the courage to leave. She held it up to me with eyes that said she was ready to reclaim something. "Can I wear it, Mommy?" she asked, her voice light but firm. I took a breath and nodded. "Yes, baby, you can wear it." We walked together down the cracked sidewalk toward her new school, her small hand tucked into mine, her dress swishing around her knees. She looked up at me, the morning breeze ruffling her hair, and said, "I'm not scared anymore." Those words settled into me, warm and heavy, as I squeezed her hand in return. Later that afternoon, while folding laundry, my phone buzzed with Indira's name flashing on the screen. I answered, leaning against the kitchen counter as the sound of Mavis humming floated in from her room. "Just checking in," Indira said, her voice soft. I heard Vera tried to call me again, saying something about family sticking together. A small laugh escaped me, surprised at its ease. Family doesn't hurt children to keep them quiet. Indira paused, then said, "You're stronger than you know, Odie. I'm proud of you." "Thank you," I whispered, glancing toward Mavis's room. That evening, as the last light of the day dipped below the rooftops, a letter arrived. Vera's handwriting curled across the envelope, tight and controlled. I sat at the kitchen table, reading her words that spoke of regret, of rebuilding family, of forgiveness she demanded like it was her right. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in the back of the drawer. No reply, no second chances. I stood by the window, watching the shadows of cars passing, and whispered, "Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting." As night settled in, Mavis and I curled up on the couch, watching an old cartoon on the small TV we found at the thrift store. She laid her head in my lap, her breath steady, her eyelids fluttering as she fought off sleep. "You kept your promise," she whispered, her voice soft, drifting. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, kissing the warm skin there, letting the moment soak in. We were far from done. Life would still be heavy some days, and the past would always leave its shadows, but we were safe. We were free. And as I turned off the light that night, the room settling into its quiet rhythm, I whispered into the darkness, "This is just the beginning." Have you ever had to choose between family and protecting yourself or your child? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one.